All right, folks. We're at officially 8:01. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Mike Coor. I'm the State Council Chair for Wisconsin Trout Unlimited. Welcome to Talking Trout, our monthly Zoom virtual gathering. Hope some of you have been able to get out and enjoy some of our early season trout fishing opportunities. The streams opened on Saturday, and we've been hearing some good reports throughout the state. So hope you're able to get out in some of this milder weather and get out and do that. Before we get into our presentation tonight, I just want to take care of a housekeeping issue. The latest issue of Wisconsin Trout, our newspaper, should be hitting your mailbox this week. And there was a problem with the printer, their distribution list on a lot of the address lists. For whatever reason, people's names got shifted up a column on their distribution list. And so the names were not jiving with the addresses. And so a lot of people were getting their newspapers and it had their correct address, but it had a different name. And I just want to let everybody know that we sincerely apologize for the mix up. It was an internal error on their side. It's nothing to do with TU, and it shouldn't have any effect on your communications with your local chapter or with TU National. Or with future communications with the state. Like I said, it was a one-time error, and we apologize for that and appreciate you understanding. And for those of you folks, if you're talking to other people and somebody mentions it, if you could help us pass along that information so everybody understands it was kind of a one-time hiccup, and it shouldn't happen again and shouldn't affect anybody. So we apologize for that. With that being said, I'm going to ask folks to if you're not speaking, to go ahead and mute yourself. And if you could turn off your video while our presenter is presenting, that'll make it a little more enjoyable for everybody else. If you guys have questions, you should see, you should have a chat box that you can open up. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to type in your question, and we're gonna kind of save them. Mike's got about a 20-minute presentation he's gonna run through, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Banaszewski. He's Director of TU's Service Partnership. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming out tonight. It's a real privilege to be talking with so many folks on what has been a very interesting day. But I think, talking about the TU Service Partnership in many ways is kind of perfect for today, and that, it shows how we in Trout Unlimited are seeking to honor the service of a broad group of folks, which includes our law enforcement and fire service and medical personnel, along with our military. Real quick about myself, I joined the TU National Staff in October of 2019 after almost 30 years with the Department of Defense. I was a naval officer. And then a civilian at the Pentagon for almost 13 years. I also worked as a guide in Maryland and Virginia, and then also as a casting instructor. I got my certified casting instructor certification years ago. So I've been active in the fly fishing and trout unlimited community for many years, and then had the privilege of taking on the what was then the Veteran Service Partnership position, and now overseeing the TU Service Partnership. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides, if you'll bear with me a few minutes. I will tell you up front, the slides are a bit text heavy. It's meant to be a standalone brief so that people can review this afterward. As Mike noted, I'll run through about 20 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterward, and I really encourage it. As you know, with the TU Service Partnership, we've gone through an evolution in this past year, and the opportunity we have tonight is for me to give you some background on it, why we did what we did, what we're looking to achieve. Can I get one thumbs up that you've got the slide on your screens now? Got it. Thanks, Mike. There we go. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to take you through the evolution from what was our Veteran Service Partnership program into what we're now calling the TU Service Partnership. Part of that is familiarizing each of you with the history of the VSP. I want folks to understand what its mission was intended to be, but then also understand where the program actually stood, both from a national perspective in terms of performance and also from a Wisconsin perspective. I've got some statistics that I just wanted to share with everybody that kind of gives you a sense of what the program was doing well, but also where it had room for improvement, and which led us to that point where we chose to evolve our recognition of service to include a more broad community. I want to tell you about the TU Service Partnership, the advantages and the challenges that we have with this new engagement philosophy, tell you about what this is, what it's not, more importantly, so folks understand it, the engagement philosophy behind it, how Trout Unlimited chapters and councils around the country are already engaging their service communities after having received this brief, and looking ahead toward this year, what it is we're trying to do. This year obviously is the 20-year anniversary. It's a poor word, but it's the anniversary of the attacks of 9/11. And it's a year in which Trout Unlimited will really be prioritizing, recognizing the service of all these communities who give so much of themselves every day. With COVID pandemic over the last year, it didn't change the nature of their service, but it did change a lot of organizations' recognition of that service, including Trout Unlimited. So getting into it, the VSP. So the Veteran Service Partnership was put in place in Trout Unlimited in 2011, and it was conceived with a very broad mandate. It meant to serve the full military community, the active duty, reservist veterans, and their families through our big three. In Trout Unlimited is, the fishing, the conservation, and the community. And the hope was that we would be able to bring the full weight of our organization behind this effort, that we would get large buy-in from our chapters and our councils, and it would be a program that would, be a flagship program for TU. At the national staff level, what we had was a very small staff. It was either one or two people over the years that were there to develop the policy guidance and do some fundraising and training, build up training resources, and then also to execute a national trips program. Typically, we would do at the national level a few trips a year that would bring in veterans or veteran couples and really, really thank them for their service, and then, hopefully publicize the successes of those trips. Just to give you a sense though, March 2020 was the end of the last fiscal reporting, which had all the activity reports. And the good news with how the program stood was twofold. One, we were serving thousands of veterans every year with hundreds of events. Typically, Trout Unlimited chapters were conducting over the years, around 630 plus or minus events a year focused on the veteran community. And that's really good. If you think about it, it's almost 2 a day. We also at the national staff level, we're doing multiple trips each year. The last year where we executed the trips program fully, we had a trip on the Upper Delaware for veteran couples and a trip to Silvertip Ranch in Montana, which was for veteran couples, and then a trip at Parade Rest Ranch in Montana where we would work with TAPS, the Transition Assistance Program for Survivors, to honor individuals that had lost loved ones through combat service, surviving spouses, surviving sons or daughters, et cetera. But with any type of, once you really start going through the data, there were quite a few buts, and I want to just make sure people understand the buts. So specifically, after 9 years, we really only had a quarter of our chapters nationwide that had invested in VSP enough to have a coordinator. We only had about 10% of our chapters that were implementing the memorandum of agreement with Healing Waters. And I get it. I understand the challenges there, and I wish I had better answers for you right now. That was conceived prior to me coming on board, and I've met with Healing Waters, their CEO. I've worked with their executive director on multiple occasions, and I get it. They get it as well. But it is what it is at this point. We can have separate conversations about that. Some of the flags were that chapter events were really on the decline. Between FY18 and FY20, we saw a national decline of almost a third in terms of events that were conducted each year. And, this is really pre-COVID. I have to say, the data went out to the end of March. really COVID hadn't impacted us in terms of activities at that point in any significant way. So I think that data is solid. We also had circumstances where we had a very small number of chapters conducting the plurality of events. Specifically at a national level, we saw we had about 3% of our chapters nationwide were conducting over 40% of the events. So we had that concentration, which really isn't healthy. And bottom line, 60% of our chapters were not engaged in any meaningful way in the VSP. Just to give you a sense of where Wisconsin was at the end of FY20. So total events, you had 19 events with a 29% chapter participation. Really solid program. I mean, you were 9th in the nation in terms of numbers. The participation rate was slightly below average, but really within margin of error, not anything to be concerned about. But, and there's always a but, the number of events declined by nearly 2/3, or almost double the national average from FY18 to FY20. Now, in the case of Wisconsin, this was largely because of one chapter. You had one chapter which was conducting a large number of events in FY18, and you know, as we got in FY20, that number went down to almost zero. But it demonstrated two things: fragility. You know, again, we had that small number of chapters that were conducting the plurality events, and just again that overall decline. So once I really digested this data, I went to the grassroots level. I really wanted to understand why we were seeing what we were seeing. So I reached out to a lot of folks nationwide that were either heavily invested, chapters heavily invested in VSP, and ones that weren't, and to find out why. What was working, what wasn't. And I really got down to about 3 core issues with VSP. One, and these fall for the most part on national. Number one was that the mission wasn't really well understood, the mission of VSP throughout TU or externally. We didn't have a clear brand. It was interpreted, you know, TU's a grassroots organization, so chapters and councils will interpret guidance differently, and that's the way we should be. But with the case of VSP, it was confusing. Chapters weren't sure whether they should just be working with healing waters or whether they should be doing something else. And the other side of this was that at the national level, we thought VSP would be a source of membership growth and diversity. We viewed it as a way for chapters and councils to work with people who were diverse, who were leadership trained, service oriented, that they could bring into their chapters and really help with leadership succession. You know, it's a challenge for every chapter nationwide. You've got people that have served on boards for 10+ years. They're looking to move on to the next phase of their lives, and there's really nobody to backfill them. So we thought VSP would be a way to do that, but we hadn't really worked with the chapters and councils to make sure they understood that. So we, you know, that for the most part fell on us. With COVID, we had some opportunities. Like most of you, you know, the FY20 calendar went to hell pretty quickly with COVID setting in. But it gave us some time for strategic reflection and development of a new model that we could build with grassroots support that might be more beneficial for chapters and councils nationwide. And so we did that. I started a working group. You know, I held several webinars where we worked with chapters and councils throughout the country to kind of develop this new model. And what I came up with was the TU Service Partnership. And what we've got now is a program where we've expanded the communities in which we're working with to include the first responders and the military communities and their families through our big 3 in Trout Unlimited. But the big difference is, you know, with first responders, we now have law enforcement, we have medical, we have fire service, and these are options for chapters. It presents now with 4 different communities that you can engage with. It doesn't create a mandate to engage with all equally, but it gives chapters options, whereas in some places in the country, it might be very difficult to engage with their military community for various reasons. There might not be a large military community nearby, or chapters have kind of made the decision based on their personnel and financial resources and time resources that working with a disabled veteran community, say with Project Healing Waters, is frankly a bit intimidating or maybe too much of a commitment for them. I mean, we all know that that's a community that when you make a commitment to, it's not to be taken lightly. So we tried to get people away from that binary choice of disabled veteran community or not, or nothing, and give them more options. We also created a feedback loop now where the outreach and engagement that chapters conduct with these various communities now has a feedback loop into the chapter where we're cultivating new membership. Whereas before, this was mostly a delivery of service to communities in the military. We now have a way to conduct this recognition with them, but then also bring them in as new active members. Again, the first responder communities are in many ways similar to the military communities, in that these individuals are service oriented, they're natural leaders, they're diverse, we're used to working in teams like we do in Trout Unlimited. But the other advantage is that these are longstanding members of their communities already. The military, when I was in the military, we tended to move every few years. And it can be very difficult to set down any sort of roots, such as we're looking to build in Trout Unlimited. So again, this is meant to give chapters new options that can help bring that vital leadership into the chapters, but also allow them to do some meaningful outreach and engagement that both builds recognition of these core communities and also highlights the work we do. I hit a few of these already, but let me go through those again. So advantages include new membership and development opportunities. So membership people, development funds, new options for gaining donors for chapters, new options for gaining members. I mentioned before these members of the first responder community, we find they have very similar service orientations, leadership, diversity. They also, particularly following COVID, have a need to get outdoors and experience what we in Trout Unlimited offer, whether it's through our angling or through our conservation activities. The folks that are in these communities have been burning it at both ends for quite a while. And many of them have experienced traumatic events similar to what military folks can experience during combat. And we have a product that we can offer that really brings some peace into their lives, and a way, like for many of us, became a core piece of us. Unique brand. So with this evolution of our recognition of service, Trout Unlimited is now the only national nonprofit that works with both the first responder communities and the military communities in fishing, conservation, and has the ability to sustain that commitment through our community. This is something refreshing. We find that for donors in particular, they find this is a new model that they like. And for members, we find this is a new model they like. And I'll get to that later in the slide, but we've seen some really compelling numbers in terms of folks that like this. Bottom line, we're giving chapters and councils options for engagement that we think will really benefit them and their local communities in the same breath. The challenges, again, fall primarily on me. Number one, we need to protect what we have done, particularly with our disabled veteran community in the previous 9 years. We are not suggesting that chapters that have successful relationships or programs that primarily focus on disabled veterans either dilute that approach or move to something broader, do more with less. No, not at all. If you're having a successful program, continue what you're doing. And if you as a leaders in your chapter feel that that's what you can do bandwidth wise, keep doing it. Great. If you feel there's room for growth and you have people willing to step up and do that, take a look at where that makes the most sense. But we absolutely don't want to walk away from what we have done. It takes time, it takes trust to build relationships with disabled veterans, and we want to protect that. The other part of this is communications, and this is why I'm so thrilled to be talking with you all tonight. I have talked with probably 70% of the councils and chapters at this point nationwide to make sure people understand why we're doing this and why we made this transition, so that they can make decisions locally on what makes the most sense, whether this is something they can embrace, whether it's something they feel is outside their capabilities at present time, but we want to make sure people make educated decisions on it. Quick slide, what this kind of sums it all up. This is a new engagement and outreach philosophy to really effectively reach types of individuals that we would like to have in Trout Unlimited over the longer term. It's a way for us in Trout Unlimited to thank a broad base of service communities, but it's also a way for us to bring in new future leaders. I said this before, it is not a dilution of our existing commitments that we've made. It's not a call to do more with less. And similarly, this is a little nuanced. I've had quite a few chapters ask me, are we trying to do what Project Healing Waters does with the military, with the disabled veteran community, with a similar community of disabled firefighters or EMTs or law enforcement officers? My answer is no, we're not trying to replicate that. But if you would like to do that, if you have the means and the community that you have ties with locally, absolutely go ahead. Our primary focus is working with the active communities. That for Trout Unlimited presents us with the broadest base of options, which is most consistent with our mission. But again, if chapters want to develop programs that focus on disabled firefighters or disabled law enforcement officers, please feel free to do so. But that's just not the focus of what it is we're trying to do. A few things on engagement. I've had a lot of questions over the last 6 months or so that we've been working on this, as who constitutes a first responder, and the guidance is always be inclusive. Our big four are fire service, law enforcement, medical, military. If anybody falls into any of those communities, I don't care what you do, you are eligible for our free membership, our free 1-year introductory membership, and we would absolutely welcome you into Trout Unlimited. A personal anecdote I often share is that, medical community, what does that include? My sister's a physical therapist, and most people would say, yeah, physical therapists, they're not first responders. That's who I go to when I've got, sore shoulder or, my back's a little stiff. She works in a COVID ward, teaching people to breathe again. So none of us has that perfect vision of what each individual does, whether they're in the military or whether they're, in the fire service. So we want to be inclusive. Trout Unlimited, we want to be inclusive. A few sub bullets here. Some other ways that we can stitch the service partnership into existing efforts. We're always trying to build new relationships or reaffirm existing ones. This, even with COVID, is a great time to do that. The virtual meetings happen, the phone calls are happening, the quick stops, just to introduce yourself with your fire halls or reacquaint yourselves with the new owner of the fly shops. This is the time to do that. We also, people need what we offer in a big way with COVID. The responsible recreation hashtag, we in Trout Unlimited National and other similar environmental organizations have used that for the last 6 months or so, promoting the idea that people can recreate safely outdoors, even during COVID, but as long as you're doing it in a way that abides by local regulations and is smart, respect social distancing. We can do these things outside. So we're encouraging people to look for ways to do responsible recreation activities that we can then promote on social media. Kids, parents are going nuts. I think Mike was saying earlier, he spent a lot of the day with his kids, teaching them. I did the same. The kids are working virtually in school. It's great to get them outdoors. In TU, we have our youth programs. It's a great way to bring in the entire family of first responders, including the kids. We don't want it just to be about mom or dad. We want it to be about the entire family. So we can stitch 2 service partnership activities together with stream of engagement. These are absolutely tailorable. As I said earlier, you don't have to reach out to all 4 communities equally. You can do what makes most sense locally. But we do think that this program will really help local leadership development. It's a way to prioritize it by doing other things that benefit your local service communities as well. Few slides or a few points here on how chapters and councils are actively doing work right now to engage service communities. We rolled this out on September 11th of this year. So I've had, some chapters that really dove in quickly. And even were working on this beforehand as I got word this was coming. What they're doing really are 3 core areas. One, we have flyers that offer our free introductory membership, which chapters are distributing. They're either going to the fire halls or going to the EMS squads, to the police stations, presenting these flyers, introducing themselves as part of the local Trout Unlimited chapter, explaining what we do, and offering them that membership. I have probably visited 40 plus places just myself, and at every one of them, I've gotten a very warm welcome, and we have brought in a lot of new members this way. The follow-up things that occur after these initial touch points have happened include things like outreach events. We have chapters that have worked with their local fire stations, police stations, et cetera, to host film nights on Zoom, to host, just something, presentations on local waterways. They can have guest hires, just making it fun, reaching out to these communities, introducing them to the angling side of what we do on Trout Unlimited, and inviting them into our community. You can do that with coffee or beer socials as well, doing those virtually. People just love talking about fishing right now, even with strangers. And then lastly, the face-to-face stuff. We've kind of gotten into winter, so it's a little more difficult to do now. But, in the last few months, I personally participated in casting clinics that were targeted toward service communities. I was talking earlier about some of the local waterways here. We have a stream restoration project on the Batten Kill, which many of you may know. It runs through Vermont and New York, past Orvis headquarters. But we've had 4 chapters, Trout Unlimited chapters, working on a stream restoration project that TU National is quarterbacking. And, these have been done safely. People are getting outside, doing some great work, and really highlighting the work that we in TU do. And things like cleanups. We're always doing cleanups at the chapter level. Those are happening. They're happening safely, and we're using those as ways to bring people into some of the therapeutic benefits of conservation. It's not just about fishing with Trout Unlimited, as you all know. It's conservation as well. Bottom line, developing that personalized local touch with their service communities, that as the weather starts to break and the fishing becomes more accessible in large parts of the country, we've got people that are interested. Last slide, and then I'll open up to questions. I just wanted to give you a sense of 2021. As the chapters and councils, as you all maybe talk about what you've heard tonight locally, and decide whether this makes sense for you, which I hope it will. I wanted to give you a sense of some of the priorities I'm going to be working on this coming year. As I said earlier, it's that 20th anniversary of 9/11. So number one, at the national level, develop opportunities to recognize these service communities. That includes expanding the national trips program. I'm working on a six trip schedule this year, as opposed to our normal 2 to 3. So each one of those is going to accompany press releases, some national exposure, thanking these folks, but also kind of demonstrating to chapters how you can do, even at a local level, these kind of programs. Outreach to non-traditional partners. The TU Service Partnership really opens up a lot of opportunities for working with other groups that maybe we hadn't thought of. JROTC, Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps. This is a high school level club for kids that have interest in military service after high school, that is typically staffed by a retired officer and a retired senior non-commissioned officer. But it's a great way to bring teenage level kids into Trout Unlimited. We develop projects that they might want to work on locally. It brings those kids in, and it hopefully builds a recurring relationship with Trout Unlimited. Mayfly Project is another interesting one. So we're doing 2 events in 2021 with Mayfly. One is a regional event in Texas. The other one is a national level event, which Chris Wood is going to come out for, COVID permitting, in Arkansas. And again, Mayfly works with foster kids. They bring fly fishing to foster kids that have had serious traumatic events in their lives. We're not there to duplicate that work, but we are going to use the TU Service Partnership to recognize the social worker community. Again, these are mental health professionals that are on the front lines of mental health crises in many cases, and we value them as members of Trout Unlimited through their affiliation with the medical community. So again, these are just creative ways you can do kind of these national or local events that recognize these communities. Membership growth. I want to touch on this. I highlighted it earlier. I'm going to continue to cultivate membership growth, but I think it's important to understand how much people value what it is we're offering right now. We've had the free membership offer for years. Our numbers from April of 2020 to the present are up 353% over the same period last year. So we're bringing in tremendous numbers of folks that, again, are those service-oriented, leadership-trained, diverse individuals that want to become local leaders in Trout Unlimited. They like what we're offering. So we're going to continue expanding our advertising. We're going to make sure that we're a virtual presence, developing that online community, getting our message out in national print, et cetera. Training resources. I want to make sure that we up our game in this coming year with what's available for chapters and councils. We have an updated program guide, which I created. But again, that's a program guide somebody has to download. I'm going to try and develop some video training that can be digested a little easier and create some more opportunities that we can train a broader number of people. The regional rendezvous, in 20, I had a lot of those. I was going to each of those to do workshops. We're going to do that this year, whether the regionals are in person or virtual. I suspect they'll be virtual. But we're going to look to train as many people as we can on what it is we're offering. And also share successes. By the spring, by the summer, we'll have chapters that have been working in this program for some time. And we'll have some experiences to share. We also started a loaning locker. I know there's chapters out there that are limited in their means to purchase gear to host events. So I have, through donations that I've gotten, waders that I can loan to chapters, rods I can loan to chapters. It's a simple mail them back and forth kind of thing. And there's a form on our website that you can fill out and request gear. Working to expand chapter hosted events for the first responders and military communities and their families. Again, whether this is virtual or in person, fly fishing film tour nights. I have 4 film nights. With this coming year, it's a perfect way to honor these communities through a film night. Really invite a lot of folks in, particularly around the fall when things should start to open up again, particularly in movie theaters and host events of this type. We would also like to see, the typical open houses, et cetera, but see those develop into reciprocal events, meaning, Trout Unlimited chapters invite service communities into their local open house, whatever it might be, fishing day. But then we start to see the reciprocal invites from the fire halls at their 4th of July picnic for TU to have a table and, a few folks demonstrating casting, the local parades, whatever they may be, where we have TU with some representation. We'd like to see this as a vehicle for that. And then lastly, developing further our network of ambassadors and supporters. I started up an advisory committee this year that's comprised of 10 individuals that are nationally known names that are really going to help us with creating corporate partnerships, creating individual partnerships that help us really get the word out and build our brand, but also develop some sustainable funding. The expansion that we're talking about costs money, and we want to develop these new partnerships that help make us sustainable for the long term. We've had, people that are on this committee right now include, Admiral Dennis Blair, retired Director of National Intelligence, Jen Ripple, the Editor-in-Chief of Dunn Magazine, Bo Beasley, he runs the Virginia Fly Fishing and Wine Festival and the Texas Fly Fishing and Brew Festival. He's a nationally known author, and he's also a retired fire captain. So people like that are the folks that we have on our advisory committee. They're going to be working with us closely over the coming year. With that, that is the formal portion of the brief. I wanted to give plenty of time for discussion. I really thank you for taking the time to hear me out. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. And again, I hope this really gives you some quality information on what the program really is, so that you can make decisions locally on potentially implementing it. I'll turn it back to Mike.
That sounds great, Mike. Thanks again for sharing what you did and for doing what you do. I think it's a really important aspect of TU, sometimes overlooked, but there's definitely some facets of this, especially when you talk about bringing new people into the chapters and developing leaders from within. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there in that first responder community to bring those folks in. So super excited to hear about that. I know personally, I've been working on veterans programs here in Wisconsin since 2009. I started helping out with the Southeast Wisconsin chapter. I think we're one of the first TU chapters to ever sign a MOU with Project Healing Waters. So It's a program that's near and dear to my heart, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time working on this program. So
Thank you for
it's
that.
great to have you at the helm. So there were a couple of questions. Somebody asked about if you could define when you say an event. Could you maybe give an example of what some of these events are, and how they allow for people, maybe say like disabled veterans, how they're able to participate?
Sure. So their events can be anything. We have a lot of chapters that do one-offs with Project Healing Waters, where you bring a group of disabled veterans to a local pond, to a local disabled access waterway, and you have a casting class, and then just a fun day fishing with a barbecue, that kind of thing. We've also had, I just hosted our first event in November, which was up to the Salmon River in Pulaski, New York, where we brought in some first responders, two of whom were also Army veterans, but one was a fireman, two more were state troopers, and we actually had a spouse come along as well. She was a public school teacher. That was a 2-day event where we were fishing for steelhead. These were not disabled individuals, so it was a little more free flowing. But the events can also be something as simple as like I mentioned, film nights. If you do, let's say you live in a smaller chapter, more rural area where there's a single fire hall, but there might be 10 or 15 volunteer firefighters at that fire hall. Outreach to that fire hall and maybe a couple of adjoining ones for a film night. Like I said, chapters have been having some success that way. And you also, as you bring folks in, you give them the free membership flyer, you get your names in the database. We're developing members that way, and folks like what we're offering. But what constitutes events can be wide open.
Yeah, it sounds great. I know I'm in the Madison area, and I know a couple of folks who've been in our veterans program have had the opportunity to go out to the Silvertip and do that couples retreat, and they've just come back and they couldn't tell. It's like a life-changing experience for them. It's pretty awesome to see them.
Yeah, Silvertip in particular was a gorgeous setting for that.
Yeah, that's great. I had a question for you. So I'll give you a little history in Wisconsin. Like I said, we spent a tremendous amount of time building up Project Healing Waters programs. We had 3 pretty good ones running, and a couple other chapters who were interested in getting it started, kind of starting and stopping. And some of the smaller chapters ran into some problems where there just wasn't the patient population to support the program. Like, we didn't have participants. We had volunteers who wanted to help, but we couldn't get the participants. And when they changed their kind of the way they structure things, it really made it so that the focus was purely on disabled veterans. A lot of our volunteers got together and we all looked at each other and we said, well, we love working with disabled veterans and we don't want to stop doing that, but we don't want to exclude a veteran who's maybe not disabled, or we don't want to put our volunteers in the position where they got to check somebody's disability card at the door or something like that. We didn't want to exclude families. So I love the way the service partnership has kind of expanded and brought all of that in. And a couple of years ago, all of the chapters, active chapters, cut ties with Project Healing Waters here in Wisconsin. We actually rebranded some of our programs. We call them Veterans on the Fly.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
It's essentially the same thing. It's just, but we have a broader, we service a broader population now. So with this change to the service partnership and bringing in first responders, all of a sudden I'm thinking about that, and we have Veterans on the Fly. We've got a cool logo, it's catchy. Can we still do that? And do you think that would it be offensive to bring in those other communities under that banner? Do we need to rethink how we're doing things?
So my personal, big picture two cents is don't interrupt what's working, with anybody. If Veterans on the Fly is working for you under its current construct, I would say continue doing that, continue doing what you're doing. But I think, as you said, not all your chapters are engaged in that. And this just was meant, again, to really create options. It wasn't so much about the chapters that were doing well, it was about the ones that weren't. And it doesn't have to be under the Veterans on the Fly construct that you engage the first responder community. I think you can have a Veteran on the Fly group And if that works, if it's a disabled veteran group that has built up trust over time, I understand completely that can be very difficult to bring new faces into. You know, you'd kind of have to take a local approach to see, you know, if you've got 3 or 4 guys or women and they're open to it, bringing more people in, maybe do it that way. But the service partnership gives you a means to do other events with broader communities and then invite those veterans in as well. So I think you've got multiple ways you can kind of approach this based on what makes the most sense for you. And frankly, the local personalities I think are important to consider. You know, a lot of these folks that, like you said, that you've invested in over many years, it takes time to build that trust, and I recognize that, and you don't want to do anything that negatively impacts that trust that's been built.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah.
So there was another question. You mentioned that that the membership is up like over 300%.
Yeah.
Do you have the actual numbers, or do you just have the percentage? Do you know what the actual number is offhand?
Well, including I don't have them right here, like on the top of my head. They're in the hundreds. It's since April, we've brought in 350 new members just through this program. And then through the essential worker program that Chris Wood had running, we brought in a lot under that. So I don't include, you know, even though we had, you know, firefighters and you know, ambulance workers sign up under the essential worker program, we didn't at the national level track specifically who was doing what. So we've got a lot that have come in under my program particularly. We've had about 350.
Yeah. Yeah. So it should
A little less
clarify
than that, but it's, you know, 340 something.
Yeah, it should clarify when you say like 300%, you're not talking about general TU membership. You're talking specifically
exactly.
about
Just
how many veterans did we
versus
pull in
military.
under that free membership, and compared to how many we're doing now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. I know when I used to help coordinate, or when I was a little more involved coordinating a local program, we used to get manufacturer discounts from, like, I think Orvis used to be a big one.
Yep.
For our work with veterans, I think TFO always gave us a deal on fly rods if it's for a veterans program. Are companies like that? Do they still make those opportunities available to chapters?
They do. And this is not just for veterans programs. This is TU wide. If you're familiar with Nick Halley on our volunteer operations staff, Nick oversees the purchase programs, if you will, for fundraising. Orvis, you know, offers a tremendous discount on most of their rods. That's in the neighborhood of, you know, a 67%, 2/3 discount. Who are the other ones? Winston offers a 50% discount. TFO has a very competitive discount as well. There's other Able Reels. They have a really nice discount. So, you know, you can use these for fundraising. You can also use them for programs, you know, for veteran programs or the like. You know, if a chapter has the financial resources to, you know, build up some rods that they want to have for use, there's a way to do that. I'm happy to share that all those. I just got an updated slate of what's available from Nick earlier today, so I'm happy to share that with you, Mike, if you're interested.
Cool. That sounds great. Yeah, I'm sure.
Nick manages that for all of Trout Unlimited, so you should always feel free to reach out to him. And
yeah, I think there's probably some missed opportunities there with some folks in leadership of local chapters who don't realize that opportunity is available to them. So
yeah, I know folks have spent a lot of time over the years building relationships with their local fly shops or, you know, that sort of thing, but there's also that broader TU option as well.
Yeah, yeah. One of the great things that I, from my years of coordinating a veterans program, I always liked how it brought in different volunteers. Like there was like a subsection of Trout Unlimited members who you didn't really see at the work days. You didn't see at your restoration work or your regular fundraisers. But if you were doing a veterans event, it like pulled some different people, and it gave opportunities to more folks to get involved. So I think this expanding the program to those first responders is only going to increase that exponentially. So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was the bottom line for this entire expansion, was to give chapters more options and opportunities to do engagements of this type in ways that not only benefit the communities, but benefit Trout Unlimited as well. I don't mean to sound selfish, but we do want to develop that next generation of leaders. We do want to further our work. We want to make it so that as the founding generation, if you will, of Trout Unlimited leaders moves on to the next phases in their life, that we continue the great work that's been done over the last 60 years. And I think this gives us a real good way to address some of the leadership and succession challenges we as a TU community face nationwide. One way to help crack that nut.
absolutely, well said. Well, I don't see any other questions, and I think that's probably a perfect way to end it with the opportunities that are presented before us. It's ours to go out and make it happen. So really want to thank you for coming on. I also wanted to ask Jason Freund, you mentioned some of the things about different events, like some different things and kind of thinking outside the box. And Jason's gone ahead and set up a kind of a less formal Zoom presentation for us. It's going to happen this Saturday, a fly tying event. So I'm gonna kick it over to Jason and just let him give a little plug for that before we leave.
Awesome, thank you. So you should have gotten the email today about that. It came out in this email. Also on Facebook and on Instagram, and we're gonna do a fly tying makers kind of thing. So we have set up so far, this weekend is gonna be a thing for Tom Wendelberg flies. So if you knew Tom, he was an interesting character. But we're gonna tie a fly or two of his, and a couple of his friends are gonna talk about his life and kind of his writings and stuff like that, and some of his flies. So that's Saturday at 7 o'clock. In 2 weeks, we're gonna do something with Wolf River flies. So we're working with the Wolf River chapter for that. And then we're talking about 2 weeks after that one, maybe doing something with rod building. So it's kind of been the first three that we have planned out. And then after that, we're pretty open for suggestions once we have a month or so planned out. And again, just kind of a totally fun hangout, a good excuse to get together is mostly what we're doing it for. So kind of a camaraderie thing.
May I ask a question? I'm sorry. One of the things that I have in the back of my mind is for our chapter, Central Wisconsin chapter, how to actually facilitate disabled veterans to fly fish. So this disability might be a loss of limbs or eyesight or PSD or, to me, that's the essence of what we're talking about. Frankly, it hasn't been addressed. So how do you do that?
Are you asking me, Robert?
Yes, anyone.
So I'll just chime in and I'll let Mike see if there's any, Mike, you've got quite a bit of experience working with the disabled veteran community as well. But typically, the fishing facilities I've been to, I just so you know, I was a Project Healing Waters volunteer for several years. So I know the power of what they do and very much respect what they do. But typically the facilities that they've used for disabled access have wheelchair accessible, fishing, pier is not the right word, but, as long as there's some sort of wheelchair accessible area where folks can fish from, whether that's an embankment that's been, flattened and has, for folks that are in wheelchairs, has some retainer around it. So, wheeling out doesn't happen. It's just generally, flat and accessible, well manicured. There's quite a few facilities that I've used over the years that were, had areas like that. We didn't build them. I don't know what kind of local facilities you have, but you can always, I know there are chapters that have built them and have gotten, you work with local building companies or contractors, and they've been very willing to donate time and materials and that sort of thing for that kind of work. Mike, I don't know if you have more you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say, I know our local WDNR or Department of Natural Resources crews have been being a little more conscious about this, and they've been looking for places to put in accessible fishing areas. The one place that comes to mind, like out in Coon Creek, there's a nice like paved path right along the trout stream with several of these. They almost look like pull-offs for a parking lot type thing, where with a little bumper on the end where your car wouldn't go, wouldn't go over, but it's to prevent a wheelchair from sliding in, like you say, that you can go pull up to, and gives you access to a trout stream. I know there's a push to do more of that. I think you mentioned, Mike, it's another opportunity for our chapters to get involved. I know the Milwaukee program had, when they were working with the VA hospital, one of the groups that they were working with was the spinal cord injury unit. And so there were a number of people who were limited mobility, and most of them were in wheelchairs. And so when we did fishing events, we made sure to plan out that there were a number of spots where we could get them off of the VA bus safely to the shoreline, and there was a flat area where they could participate in the program. So and I think if you're doing work, there's also equipment manufacturers. People have come up with some pretty creative ways to help folks with disabilities still enjoy like the sport of fly fishing and fishing in general. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. If your chapter's not doing something right now, I would encourage you yourself to maybe look around and ask some more questions and see if there's an opportunity that you could maybe do something yourself to make that happen. So
It's a little more expensive investment, Robert, but I have seen chapters that purchase drift boats. There's handicapped accessible drift boats for wheelchairs, and they've run trips. They'll purchase one. Obviously, you got to have the financial resources for it, and host trips off that. You can bring 2 wheelchair bound individuals with a guide and a helper out on a day trip, and it's wonderful for them. So it's an option, but a more expensive one.
Those are really good suggestions. I would encourage TU nationally to come up with either a list or a brochure or something that reflects the ideas that you guys just stated. I think that would be really good. Thank you.
Sure. I would just follow that up. If you go to, it's the last page of my briefing, which I'll make sure Mike has after this, but if you go to www.tu.org/service, we've got the program guide right there, and we do address some of the issues you're talking about. It's basically how to start a TU service partnership program, and it addresses lots of these types of tactical, if you will, level challenges for chapters. It gives them some advice on that front.
sounds great. So if anybody wasn't able to view this, or you want to go back and re-see the presentation, we've recorded this. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. Expect that to hit sometime in the next week, and then so folks will be able to use this as a resource. You can go back and review some of that presentation material, and hopefully the conversations tonight have sparked some ideas for you to take back to your chapter. I know right now with COVID, a lot of us are still, there's not a lot happening, but this is the time to be thinking about what your chapter is going to look like post-COVID and what types of activities that you want to do. And again, like Mike brought up, there's a lot of opportunities now virtually to go out and engage some of these folks and start bringing them into our community. So I would encourage you to all think of ways that we can do that. So thanks again, Mike, for joining us. Really appreciate it. We'll be in touch. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And we hope to see you Saturday night. Jason's going to lead that fly tying group. It'll be a little less formal and maybe a little more fun, a little more interactive than this was. But
I'm not fun. Sorry.
No, this is great. This is great. I mean, this is important, good work. So
no,
I'm sure you're a lot of fun. We'll get you out at one of our events, and
thank you.
When things get back to normal,
love to.
And we'll all have a lot of fun. So, all right, have a good night, guys. Thanks again.
Night, everybody.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.